Hello and welcome to Infrastructure Matters, episode number 60. And this is the first episode in which I get to host. This is Dion Hinchcliffe. I'm head of CIO practice for the Futurum Group, and I'll let my two distinguished guests and colleagues introduce themselves.
Well, good morning, guys. This is Camberley Bates. You know me. Calling in from Colorado. We're trying to get into the fall. We haven't had real snow yet, so... If you're booking your ski trip, be a little wary of it right now. All yours.
Nice and cool here, and the leaves are starting to turn here in DC. So,
well, coming to you from Rhinebeck, New York, I'm Steven Dickens. We're at the end. October is kind of leaf peeping month here in the Hudson Valley, and we're at the end of it. Last week was the sort of peak week, so no snow yet. Snow up on Whiteface, where my kids are getting excited about skiing, but we're not there yet. So busy week this week.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an interesting month, and we're like right in the middle of tech conference season. We still got about 1 month to go. I know I've got a lot of events coming up, but there has been a bunch of news this week. I also visited some CIOs for my practice, but let's get into Tech Exchange. I think something happened there this week. Was it Steven, were you there?
Yeah, so Keith Townsend, who's not with us today, he's recovering in the fetal position after a busy week. I'll be doing that later. But no, seriously, IBM's trying to really bifurcate its conferences, and I think it's a really strong approach. They had IBM Think, which is in May. That had previously been IBM's kind of big show. And what they decided to do, which I think is very wise, is split their shows. So this week was Tech Exchange. If IBM Think is the kind of executive decision maker, kind of thought leader conference in the IBM calendar, Tech Exchange is the practitioner and developer conference. So this is where you go and get your certifications, you do your hands-on labs. So a very different vibe. I've got this sort of ratio that sort of I use, the sports coats to hoodie ratio for conferences. And this was definitely a hoodies conference. Really good event. Year 2, still building, but really good. Graham Noseworthy, the event organizer, and kind of coined the term that people did about him being the mayor of Tech Exchange. Really trying to focus in on kind of growing this event. Some big announcements, the Granite 3 stuff, which I know, Dion, you're going to cover. I got to spend some time with a couple of distinguished engineers on Instruct Lab, so that was really fascinating. Got to geek out on the Mainframe stuff. One of the big announcements from one of the partners at the show is an open source project around Zoe that's been going for 5 years. That's now getting to the point where that's starting to get deployed into production environments on the mainframe. The mainframe guys are a little slower to put open source into production. And one of the barriers to that has been enterprise support. So the guys at Broadcom offered enterprise support to their clients for Zoe. Key thing for lots of talk about Broadcom and how they add value versus charge for things right now. More broadly, the mainframe division within Broadcom decided to offer that enterprise support free of charge to any of its clients.
I think it's great that we're seeing open source finally appear in any kind of meaningful way in the mainframe. But Steven, just for those not in the know, can you give us a thumbnail explanation of what Zoe is?
Yeah, so Zoe's really trying to open up the platform, try and provide that sort of open source democratized access into the platform. So I don't want to describe it as an API layer, but that's probably the right way to think about it. This is taking away sort of some of the proprietary nature of the platform and making it the plumbing and some of that interface and developer piece consistent so that various vendors, so Rocket also offer enterprise support. I met with their SVP, Phil Bucklow, while I was at the event. You know, they've been offering the enterprise support of Zoe for a couple of years now. Okay. So I think it's starting to see this layer is being adopted across the board more and more.
So, Stephen, I've got a question regarding to the open source in Linux. But, Linux is much more hardened, of course, than Windows, as we talked about with the with the cyber strike that we had, or some of the strikes, the CrowdStrike situation we had. But Mainframe has always been known, and I've always admired it for its high availability and its security. By going to open source technology on a mainframe, are they going to be able to maintain that capabilities there that we're looking at? I don't know, what is it, 8 nines, 9, some sort of ridiculous 9. 8 nines. Can they bring to market 8 nines on that kind of platform?
Yes, I mean, the good thing for Zoe, and Zoe's on the ZOS side, not on the Linux side, so it's core into the core value prop. I think the main contributors to Zoe are Broadcom, IBM, Rocket. There's obviously open source community members, but the key founders of that code came from those 3 vendors. So it is a full open source project. It's a project under the Open Mainframe project, which is a Linux Foundation project. So it's kind of got all those characteristics. There's no sort of proprietary nature of this. It's nothing weird. But I think with the main contributors coming from those mainframe software vendors, they're absolutely worried and paranoid about all the things that they would be if it was their own software. So I think you're getting the best of open source and a community, but you're also bringing that value from those vendors who are traditionally sort of focused in on the platform.
And the other thing I would comment on there from the IBM Earnings is that they Arvind talked about how the mainframe, I believe it was Arvind, talked about how the mainframe had grown 30% IOPS growth. It appears within this cycle of the current 16, right? Z16 that we have. So that's, to me,
NIPS growth, not IOPS growth.
Sorry, yeah. NIPS growth. Sorry, guy. But that seems to me pretty dramatic growth. For that space.
MIPS is a bad measure of growth, and it's the one thing I don't like IBM talking about. The overall revenue was 19% down. That sounds bad. It really isn't bad when you look at where they are in the cycle. They're 10 quarters into the Z16 cycle. I've seen drops as much as 50, 60% this late in the cycle. So the fact it's 19%, they were up 8% in the 9th quarter, which was last quarter. So, I think you've got to look at it balanced. They've already announced Telum 2. We know that's coming next year. We don't know exactly, I know exactly when, but I probably shouldn't say. So I think talking about earnings, from IBM, which was the other big news that happened during the event, top line growth, again, low single digits from IBM, but top line growth, Red Hat, good double digit growth. Power, I spent some time with the Power team this week. They've turned their business to a growth business and a profitability business, where they were with the open power stuff a few years ago, and how that business was unraveling is a real kudos moment for Tom McPherson, who leads that business. So I think I see some strong fundamentals across the board, across IBM. I think the next, probably Q4 will be okay for the mainframe. Q1 and Q2 are going to be, probably Q1 will be tough. Last quarter of the cycle, and they'll have pulled all the business forward into Q4, so that's going to be tough. I think Red Hat, strong growth. The AI business starting to show some strong numbers. Consulting, drafting off that AI piece. So I think sort of good story all round. I'd like to see higher single digits than from IBM, but I think we'll see that once that mainframe early part of the cycle starts to come through.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting times for IBM in general. And that really highlights 2 AI pieces of news that I'd love both your feedback on. Mm-hmm. The first one was news we heard last week, but was announced this week. Granite 3.0 was released by IBM. Now, Granite's not really been talked about a lot in kind of broader AI circles, and that's probably an oversight. IBM hasn't, I think, missed the AI cycle the first time around with Watson, and then it finally went big. But IBM has gotten very serious about large language models designed for business, and Granite 3.0 is their new flagship model. It has the new 3.0 version has 3 different flavors. One is just the general purpose that you can use for inference for all sorts of things, and it's designed to have an optimal cost for inference, but still be high performing. So it can match most of, or come very close to most of the popular models like OpenAI or Anthropic or any of those. Yet it is significantly cheaper. They're really focusing on the enterprise need for, I need performance, but this has to be cost effective. It has to be affordable. And that's where IBM is really trying to differentiate itself. They also have a Granite Guardian model, which is optimized for safety. So you're trying to use this in more sensitive applications like healthcare, financial services, and things like other regulated industries. You can use Granite Guardian and get an extra level of safety at a small cost for the performance or cost. And then they have a new mixture of experts model too. So there's something for everybody in Granite, and you'll be hearing lots more about this. And I think at IBM's really pragmatic view is we're going to provide high performance, but we're going to make it cost effective, and we're going to have all the enterprise sensibility that you expect around safety, security, compliance, and trust. And I think that's coming in at the right level. And if their benchmarks hold up, I mean, it's impressive work. I think you'll see Granite being used by enterprises, especially existing IBM customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just see IBM as the grown-up in the room when it comes to AI. From the consulting point of view, what they do with Instruct Lab is really fascinating for me. Then when you get to I think I'd describe it as pragmatic approach to models with Granite.
That's what
it may be not as sexy as Llama and Claude and some of the other stuff that we see in the sort of big arm waving and sort of image generation and all the things that kind of make it easy for the consumers to get their head round on X and kind of the press to talk about. But where enterprises are going to be, that's a very different story. And I think that what I picked up from this week at Tech Exchange and what you've just said there, Dion, I think IBM's going to be seen by a lot of big enterprises, attestation, some of the work they're doing around regulated industries, the focus on cost. That's just all pragmatism, and that's, I think, IBM focusing on what it's really good at and what customers see them focused on as well.
I agree, but Camberley, what do you think? I mean, I just don't see IBM getting at bat with the people who are already using IBM. Do they have a chance here?
Well, where their chances, I'm not sure about the Granite piece of it. Where their chances is what they've done a very good job of usually have done a very good job of consulting, and that's probably why the Wall Street wasn't particularly pleased with their earnings, because the consulting dragged their earnings down, their lack of it. And traditionally, they have been in the forefront of helping people envision where they're going, what they're doing, and delivering on it. So the fact that that was down is concerning, but I haven't gotten into the depths of that, so I can't really comment about the whys and wherefores and where those numbers kind of came down on. But that would be my concern. And
it's an interesting you brought that up, is that their point of the spear for IBM consulting with AI is this new Granite 3.0. They made that clear. That's the default model they'll be using for all their IBM consulting. So
it also might be, well, maybe not, because if you look at where the AI dollars are coming from, the majority of it is a percentage of their high percentage of it is coming from consulting, not infrastructure technology.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another issue that you would look at in terms of when we looked at the numbers, and what they're doing. So yeah,
I mean, from an infrastructure point of view, they've got Spire. Now that came through with a relatively soft launch, but they announced that that's going to be also included in the Power 11 processor and systems when that comes out next year. So, I mean, IBM's got this Spire sort of DPU type layer that's now going to be in the Telum 2 processor and the Power 11 processor, so that sort of AI accelerator piece. So from an infrastructure, that's going to take a while to show up in IBM's earnings, because I'd imagine that's going to be mid to end of next year before it starts to get shipped across both of those systems. But they're certainly playing in this space. But as I'm with you, Camberley, I was disappointed in the consulting numbers.
Yeah,
I was expecting more.
Yeah, I pulled up my notes that I read down on it. And one of the things, if you look at the book of business, quote unquote, I think this was from Kavanaugh. We exited 90 days ago, IBM at above $2 billion, 75% of that was consulting. And now they are, that book of business is building, is at $3 billion now, but it's also saying 80% of that business is consulting. The flip side of that is their hybrid cloud piece of it, which is really dominated by, I believe, is dominated by the Red Hat. That thing's going gangbusters. And so they were, they bought Red Hat, in 2019 for $34 billion. At the time, you're like going, where the heck, how are they going to get the payback on that? And,
11 times revenue at the time.
They're looking at, they're going to turn that payback is going to be, next year. With the growth they've had. And it's, as we look at containers, OpenShift is that piece of it. And they are also looking at the growth of virtualization that they may have the ability to take on. And as we continue
they certainly claim to. They think that all the challenges that Broadcom has brought to VMware's customers is going to be
we'll see.
That's very
Well, IBM's also got HashiCorp that's due to close.
Yeah. Whether
that closes this year, I haven't heard an update on when that's projected to close, but it can't be that far away.
They talked about it a bit, but they didn't say when. But they had a reflection on that, especially on
Dinesh in his keynote for Tech Exchange was talking about automation and sort of hinting to where HashiCorp's going to fit in. I hope they take the model that they did with Red Hat and run Hashi separately and stand alone and kind of let that be as a community.
They risk really killing the magic of that company.
Yeah. Blue washing HashiCorp would be a mistake.
Exactly. Since we're on the topic of AI, and I know this is kind of an odd kind of place to go, but Cohesity, which is one of the up and coming data protection devices that's out there, and the noise on them is they're acquiring the part of Veritas, which will be make them well over a couple of $1 billion in revenue, I think is where they're going to end up being. But they launched this thing, and I've been scratching my head on this one. I have been like, why the heck are they doing this? Because MBU is much bigger, Net Backup is much bigger than Cohesity. It's probably 2/3 of revenue or something like that. But Gaia is their quote-unquote generative AI search capability. Okay, data protection, generative AI search capability. Why, scratch your head, figure this one out. It all of a sudden clicked. So what they were showing, and it was really cool what they were showing. Gregory Stanton, who is their VP of AI Solutions, was showing the demo of this. So because you're a file system, because Cohesity is a file system, and I have all the abilities to do that file system analysis of that data that's been backed up, that is sitting there, it's solid data, whatever. I now can apply some generative AI. They've got an OpenAI LLM behind it. I'm adding in my data, selecting whatever data files I want from that, which has been backed up that I can look at. So I can bring in, NetApp, I can bring in Dell, I can bring in whatever. I go and select the files that I want. It produces a really cool visual of a word cloud. So we've all seen word cloud. So I select all this data. I get this word cloud. And so imagine I'm like looking at, and one of the things he was talking about is like, okay, somebody just walked out the door. I go grab his data from his computer, load it all up, give me a word cloud, and now I can, and then it's giving me the suggested questions to ask for that word cloud. And now I can click down into this word cloud, this very visual thing. And I thought, God, this is great. Talking to Greg Stanton, and I'm super excited because he's a cool guy in terms of this visual thinking. He said, he's talking to people and I got this data. What do I ask it? And so now I've got the generative
having the data being one thing, but knowing how to interrogate it being a completely different thing.
Exactly. Okay, so here's what you might want to drill into. And so there's levels that I could go into with that word cloud and have it suggest kind of things. So I thought, okay, so this is dangerous having the AI think for me about what I should be thinking.
But on the other hand, it did just train up on all that data, so it actually knows what's in there. So it's well positioned to suggest what you might want to look at, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
Yeah.
Now, imagine how much data an MBU has got. Granted, it's not a total file system over there, so there's work to be done. But that's where this is going. They didn't confirm that.
and it makes total sense.
When I suggested that, they all looked at me as like,
my concern is around preserving security and permissions access to all that data. That's going to be the tricky part. If they can do that, then that's going to, I would think, going to be usable. Otherwise, the concern is that people get access to information they shouldn't.
Right,
Yeah.
and I brought that up. They have a tool called DataHawk. I haven't kind of really drilled down into where that is, but you're absolutely, and I brought that up too. Where's the PII stuff? Where is all this stuff to how you do it? So there is a discipline around it. But this was really fun. It was really fun.
Yeah, well, I would think we're going to see AI and everything. And speaking of AI, my second bit of news was more is not on the consumer side, but more on the new players, and that is Anthropic this week to a lot of fanfare, and it's getting an intense amount of attention in the AI space. Enabled or added direct computer use to its Claude model, and this allows Claude to actually interact with any application or any computer interface you give it. It can click, it can read the screen, understand the feedback. You can ask it to learn an application for you and then carry out actions within it. It can click buttons, type text. And the reason this is such a big deal is, one, you're handing direct control of our apps and IT systems to AI. It can actually interact with it directly. And this goes right to the whole agent-based AI discussion, which is up to now really been focused on APIs. It seems that we'll be training these new models on APIs and creating a bunch of synthetic data so that they can figure out how to carry out requests with it. This takes all that away. You can out any application. It even works on mobile devices. It is really astounding and has lots of security implications. In fact, there's really open-ended, concerns in my book about what this all means when you're handing control to a large language model of your computer system. But demos out there just...
Nothing could go wrong there, could it, Dion?
Go wrong. Exactly. Well, and I think we have really low-level AI governance. We have low maturity AI governance in most organizations, and they're just not right. They don't have the guardrails to all the things that can go wrong, and the bad guys can use this to try and hack any system as well. And I thought there would be some screening of users, but no, they really want to get out ahead because agent-based AI is the next big wave. Companies like Salesforce and IBM are leaders in that, but this puts Anthropic out front of anybody right now. So
Dion, is this let's just break everything and see what goes wrong type model?
Is this really fast and break a lot of things? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, is it the classic sort of San Francisco tech startup? Let's break things and then fix it on the backside.
Yeah, but this was not being a good citizen.
Well, yeah, I mean, so that's why I'm asking you.
It was going to happen, and it has been happening in the open source side, but it hasn't, not in a high performance model. Now, Claude is really at the very top of the benchmark. So now you're handing an incredibly capable, smart AI to carry out any requests via any set of applications you give access to. I mean, what could go wrong? So
this brings up when you think about what could go wrong. So this week, the SEC had some penalties for violating a disclosure of the SolarWinds impact onto companies like Unisys is paying $1 million or more so on terms of not being disclosed what the impact of SolarWinds was. That made me think, okay, so this next, I would suspect, no matter who gets into presidency and Congress, they're going to pass something this next year on AI diligence. And now we are going to get into that piece of it. Whoever's going to do that would be SEC or the FCC on this diligence that they are going to have to put around how you implement and execute on your AI capabilities, especially interfacing with clients.
I mean, my challenge with that is we were talking about regulation 9 months ago on large language models, and it was about the size of the model. And the industry's now pivoted to small language models. So if we'd have put that regulation in place 9 months ago, it would have been completely redundant because the industry is now focused on small language models. If we put regulation to regulate what Claude did this week, for instance, by 6 months' time, we'll have moved to somewhere else. And the technology. So I don't know whether the regulators can we can barely keep up as analysts, let alone.
Well, and I think that what Europe has done, they learned a lot from GDPR, which, it was very hard to implement, and, millions of companies are constantly in violation of it because this is so hard to comply with. So I think Europe learned its lesson, and the AI Act, makes regulations that cover all AI. Says, here's some, let's do first principles. First, don't use it in any life critical systems, right? Don't use it in weapons. Don't use it in, all the obvious places we never want to see AI. And so I think that's kind of the better approach is say, here's the most important thing you can't keep wrong with AI is, don't use it to fly planes, for example. We don't want our LLMs to do that yet until we understand a lot better about what it can and cannot do well. And so,
the challenge with that though, Dion, you've got organizations like Palantir whose stock price is going crazy this year because they're bringing AI to the defense community.
Well, that's always been the criticism of AI. They're used. Palantir is already used in all the DoD's fusion centers. DHS's fusion centers everywhere, where they bring data from every agency, fuse it together using AI or not, pre-generative. There's always been a concern with those guys.
So, aren't your CIO buddies all worried about this and raising,
They are. Well, that's my last piece of news. Is I've met in San Ramon, California. The CIO of Chevron hosted SDA Bocconi's Center of Digital Strategies, our quarterly CIO roundtable. And one CIOs don't want to talk about AI anymore at all because that's all they ever talked about. So that was not a topic of discussion. Their big concern is what's coming over the next 2 years in terms of IT fragmenting the supply chain. The concern is that around 2027, the belief is that Taiwan could be at least blockaded, and this is going to really suddenly make cloud costs skyrocket. No one knows for sure, but you have to plan for it. They can't put their head in the sand because they have to assume that something could happen. There's a high probability that something could happen there. And then just a lot of them moved a lot of their outsourcing to India. They moved some of their operations from China because it's increasingly hard to operate in China. They moved them over to India. And now India is playing around with maybe joining BRICS more seriously. They're already in BRICS, but they're considering doubling down. Now they're like, do we have to move again? What happens if India goes all the way over to BRICS? Then we probably have to move out of India and find some new place, which they're not sure what that is. So there's a lot of concern around chips and cloud, and just these new geopolitical alliances are causing a lot of potential churn. And so they have a lot of drawing boards, not knowing what's going to happen, trying to figure out how these alliances are going to shake out, where they're going to get chips from, where they should move their cloud workloads. And so it's interesting times.
Yeah, I think we're going to see the resurgence of Intel. I think we're at the bottom with Intel, but I think just the whole industry is going to come back towards a US-based chip manufacturer and designer.
Reshoring, that's an option that they're all looking at too, or moving to South America. South America, because it's in the close to the American time zones, is also starting to look more and more attractive.
Yeah,
that maybe that's the blessings. Some of the blessings coming out of, if we can imagine blessings coming from out of tragedy, which is like COVID, because that's what woke us up to this.
Yes,
it was the COVID shut down and the supply chains. We went, holy crap, we need to do something differently. So,
shined a light on where all this stuff was coming from, and I think just we didn't talk about Taiwan as much as we did, as we are now. 3-4 years ago, it was, just these chips magically appeared in our servers and in our data centers, and we didn't know where they came from. I think everybody does now.
Yeah. Well, I think the hard lesson also is we've got to fix some of our regulations. They're trying to build chip plants here, but it's taking 5 times longer than it takes. Let's say
we've got to just fast track that stuff, get out of the way, and just let Intel and Samsung just build.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, that's all the time we have this week. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with episode 61, and hopefully our erstwhile colleague, Keith Townsend, will rejoin us. And thanks everyone for watching.